going to share my whole process of how I make a miniature from sculpting to making them print ready and summoning them out of the printer. But first, designing. I got a set of threatening demands through the hole in my wall to make my next miniature a gnome. So I'm gonna go out into the forest and see if there's any gnomes that want to model for me. I wanted to come to Wallerton Park because there have been a lot of accounts and articles that talk about gnome sightings. There was one article from the 1930s that talked about a little girl being bitten by a small man in a waistcoat, which was around here. So we have to be a little bit careful. That's why I brought a little offering. I brought a small bowl of porridge to give to the gnomes in the hopes that they will find us nice and that they won't bite us. Let's go. I found some deer hair, just pretty rough hair, but gnomes usually use these for weaving, like cloaks and coats and stuff. So we'll just leave it here and maybe they'll pick it up later. This looks like a little path that they use. Unfortunately, we can't go in there, but I did find a small pipe. So this means that there's definitely some gnomes in the area. I'm really excited to go on more adventures like this, so if you have any folkloric creatures in your area, please tell me about them in the comments so I can go look for them. Okay, so I think I found another place that they hang out in. These are holes that they often hide in when people pass by, so I think I'm gonna leave the bowl of porridge here and hope that they take my offering. We're definitely onto something. Excuse me, sir, have you seen any gnomes?
Where is it? What? What is that?
Did you get it?
I did get it.
So I think I just saw one there. So I'm gonna try and hang her out here and see if I can get a better look at it and maybe do some sketching. Okay. Gnomes are benevolent folk that like helping out small animals and people who treat them with kindness. They live in hills or houses, but be careful, they really do not like to be spied on. I'm trying to do as many sketches here as I can without disturbing them. After leaving this field, we came across another gnome who seemed to be living in an old tree. He was not happy to see us though, and we had to dodge a mushroom out of the way. So we decided that was our cue to leave. So now that we got our concepts, it's time to start sculpting. My followers and my patrons have been asking me a bunch of questions about sculpting and 3D printing, and I'm gonna try my best to answer them all. I am a self-taught sculptor, so don't take my advice too strictly, but I had a little bit of 3D education at animation school, so I did have some of the basics. First question that I get all of the time is, what programs do you use? For sculpting, I mainly use Nomad because to me it feels very much like sculpting with clay. It's super intuitive, but it definitely has its limits. It doesn't really do well with hard surface, or you can't model anything, which is why I also use Blender, and I try to use them back and forth. Especially for cleaning up, Blender is just super handy. All of these softwares have great tutorials if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, which I will put down below, but those are the ones that I use. Then the next question is, do you use a base mesh? I have built a few base meshes, which just makes it easier to sculpt faster. I've got one for humans, goblins, rabbits, and sausages. But let me show you how I make one. I start by blocking out the big shapes, making sure that I keep my reference close to me. In Nomad, I make a detailed hierarchy so everything is linked together, which makes it easier to do the next step, which is posing. I keep most of the shapes separate so I can change things whenever I want to. Number 3, what sculpting tools do you use? So once I have a pose, I like to start adding detail. For miniatures, I think it's super important to remember how small it's actually going to be. So that's why I try using hard edges and exaggerating features. For this, I mainly use a flattened brush or the crease tool, while the inflate tool is really nice to get some plumpness. It's important to keep turning your model around and zoom out every so often so that you don't forget what scale you're actually working on. A good balance between textures and empty spaces for freehand makes it really fun to paint. I'm not a great painter, so I try to avoid hard to reach spaces. At the end, I merge everything together and I try to clean up all of the details. Another question I got asked is, How long does it take from someone to get from 0 to decent? Of course, this is a super hard question to ask because it all depends on what you consider decent. I can show you some of my early experiments, which were mostly heads because I wanted to start small. I feel like that's the best idea. Try to start with super simple things so you don't freak yourself out and you build up slowly. I feel like for me, it took about a month to get from knowing nothing at all to starting to feel pretty comfortable with the software. I was definitely not good, but I felt like I could do the stuff that I wanted to do. And don't be afraid to make a few awful monsters. And then of course, finally, how do I make my model ready to print? When I finish sculpting, there are a million polygons. So I first clean up my mesh, fix holes, and then lower the polygons in Nomad. Then I export it as an STL and send that to my computer. In Blender, I then open the 3D printing tab and clean up the mesh. And then it's basically ready to export and import into your slicing program. This is where you add your supports for printing, which is super important. It can be quite complicated, but at the start, I recommend using the auto features and then going from there. Don't put any supports on important details like the face or basically anything on the front. Be careful for islands, which you can check for in most softwares. And I like to change up the thickness of my support. It's based on the likeliness of bits snapping off. Then it's on to the next step. You're ready to 3D print your miniature. You can also ask around and see if there's anyone around you that can help you with 3D printing or who will 3D print it for you. I prefer to do a simple materializing ritual. Always be careful with materializing rituals so you don't summon anything that you don't want to. And there you have it! Your first miniature. This miniature is available on my Patreon, where you can also get lore pages, help me decide what videos I'm gonna make, and a bunch of other cool stuff. And I just want to thank you for watching. If you wanna like this video, that would be great, and I'll see you next time.